As we had agreed at the last meeting, today we're going to start with 10 minutes from the legislative clerks to tell us a little bit about proposing amendments, etc., and working through legislative bills. And so I'll just pass it on very quickly, please.
So I'm Émilie Thivierge, and as mentioned in the memo that all the members of the committee received earlier in February, I'm the legislative clerk assigned to C5. So my role is to provide you and the chair of the committee with some advice on the admissibility of amendments for the clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C5. So if you have any questions on the admissibility of an amendment that you would like to bring forward, or if you have any questions on the clause-by-clause process in itself, please feel free to contact me. Mon numéro de téléphone et mon adresse courriel se trouvent dans le mémo que vous avez.
My coordinates are found in the memo that you've received, email and address. And there's going to be some traveling, of course, to give you some briefings and training on the article by or clause by clause of the bill.
An amendment that was drafted by the Legislative Council, namely my colleague here, Isabelle de Souza. It's always useful and beneficial to give her permission to discuss it with me. Et sur ça, je lui cède la parole.
Alors, bonjour, mon nom est Isabelle de Souza. Je suis...
Good morning, my name is Isabelle de Souza. I'm a legal advisor for the committee, and I'm assigned to Bill C5 for the drafting of amendments. So if you are intending to present any amendments to this bill, please let me know as soon as possible. And for your information, all our conversations and discussions will be completely confidential and nonpartisan. If you seek to make some requests, please send me your instructions in your own words in writing. If you have many requests, we have a template that would be useful in preparing your amendments. Once I've received your instructions, I'll ensure that I will translate this to legalese and to have the outcome that you require. If you have any legal issues as to charter rights or jurisdictional issues, please ask them and I will try to find you alternate means of attaining the same objective. Drafting amendments is similar to the drafting of a private member's bill. Each amendment should go through the various drafts, approval, revision, review, revision if necessary, before a legal expert. So the process can be rather lengthy, depending on the complexity of how many and what nature of requests we get for amendments. And we're often working on many bills at the same time, which brings me back to my starting point. Please make your request as soon as possible, as soon as you know what you want. And don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions at any time in the process. I'll be pleased to help you, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for that. We have 2 minutes if anybody has any quick questions, and if not, then I would ask that you get in touch with these wonderful, very smart legislative clerks. Mr. Lawrence.
Sorry, just simple new member question. The contact information I'll provide it in the binder for the committee.
I think we can circulate their contact information again so that everybody has it. That'd be okay? Thank you for that. So moving on, we'd like to welcome our two panelists for this first hour, the Honourable Michael MacDonald from the Canadian Judicial Council and Madame Justice Adele Kent from the National Judicial Institute. Both of you will have 10 minutes each for your remarks, followed by lines of questioning from members from the table. So if I'll start with Ms. Kent, your 10 minutes, please, for your remarks.
Thank you. I think my colleague, Mr. McDonald, and I decided that our presentation will be somewhat intermingled between the two of us, and so I would invite Mr. McDonald to begin.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. Thank you, Madam Chair, Madame la Présidente. I'm pleased to have been invited to speak to the honourable members of this House in my capacity as Interim Executive Director of the Canadian Judicial Council. While I am no longer a judge or a member of the Council, I do have significant knowledge of the Council, having been the former Chief Justice of Nova Scotia and a Council member for over 20 years. Justice Kent, as Justice Kent has indicated, Justice Kent and I propose the following approach, Madame la Présidente, if it's fine with you. She will soon speak about the excellent educational programming available to all judges in Canada through the National Judicial Institute. I will then speak to the Council's overall view of Bill C-5 and its laudable goal of strengthening public confidence in our justice system, particularly for sexual assault survivors. The goal is one that the judiciary in Canada wholeheartedly agrees with. We do, however, want to respectfully stress two concerns for your consideration. Firstly, the principle of judicial independence and separation of powers require judicial education to always remain under the control and supervision of the judiciary, free from outside influence. Of particular concern would be influence from government, which, after all, is a party to all sexual assault cases. Le deuxième sujet de préoccupation concerne le fait que
Our second issue of concern is that this law covers the appointment of federal judges. Our judges, our provincial judges and territorial judges, have seen a growing rate of these kind of cases of sexual assault, and they must have access to the same access to the training involved as to their counterparts federally. If the government intends to adopt this bill in order to respond to our concern of the respect of the independence of the judiciary, I would propose a minor amendment, a minor change to the current wording of the bill in order to temper or moderate the effect of this bill on the principles of judiciary independence.
take questions. Tout d'abord, un mot sur le rôle Conseil canadien de magistrature.
First of all, a role on the Canadian Council. The Council is composed of all the judges and the senior judges of superior courts in Canada, appointed by the government, federal government, and with the possibility of preserving and keeping the public confidence in the judiciary. The Chief Justice has to be the leader in the education of his fellow judges.
Canadian Chief Justices are and must be leaders in judicial education. Overseeing judicial education is a fundamental responsibility of the judicial branch of government and is a key focus of our Council's mandate. I can assure you, each and every one of you, that every Council member takes very seriously their responsibility to provide oversight and guidance on the kinds of continuing education their respective judges undertake. In short, to ensure public confidence in the administration of justice, the justice system relies on well-educated, professional, and an independent judiciary. Pour préserver la confiance du public dans l'administration de la justice, le système de justice.
In order to maintain the confidence of the public in the administration of justice and our system of justice, we must have a knowledgeable, professional, independent judiciary.
Objectives of this legislation and what it seeks to achieve. All Canadian judges must be keenly aware of the challenges faced by survivors of sexual assault. I have 3 daughters. My daughter is a first-year lawyer. She reminds me that social context education of the type targeted by this bill is as important and fundamental as our understanding of contract law, tort law, criminal law, and other substantive law. As my colleague Justice Kent will attest to and provide more detail on, the National Judicial Institute, Canada's primary education provider for Canadian judges, is committed to ensuring that its professional development programs and resources meet the needs of Canada's judiciary and ultimately helps to strengthen the justice system. The judiciary, honourable members, is keenly aware of the need to continually improve and learn in order to maintain the confidence of the public. And let me respectfully say, in our humble opinion, we are on top of this. Mon collègue, le juge de l'INM, vous fournira maintenant.
My colleague, Judge Kent, will give you more details on this at this time.
Allowing me this occasion to attend here and give you some information about the judicial education that we offer to Canadian judges. The National Judicial Institute, the NJI, is a not-for-profit, independent organization dedicated to developing and delivering high-quality professional development to all Canadian judges, federal, provincial, and territorial. The NJI is bijural and recognizes the importance of incorporating Indigenous legal principles into our training. One of the NJI's fundamental principles is that judicial education must be judge-led. This is consistent with the International Organization of Judicial Trainers' Declaration on Judicial Training, which states, the judiciary and judicial training institutes should be responsible for the design, content, and delivery of judicial training. And we have available for you the NJI's 20 principles of judicial education. One of the primary ones, fundamental one, is the necessity that judicial education be judge-led. Il est important que toute personne impliquée dans un...
It is vital that all people involved in the judicial process be treated with respect and dignity. A judge must always be just and impartial and respect the individual rights of each participant, be they the plaintiff, the accused, or witnesses. As of 2010, the Institute has insisted that these essential programs consist of training on the social context in order to ensure that the judges, particularly newly appointed judges, be conscious and aware of the challenges which vulnerable groups face within society. As of January 2014 to 2020, the NJI has proposed 42 courses dealing with sexual assault, the competencies and needed to deal with these cases, and the contexts and environment of these individuals. These various courses last up to several days, up to periods of national programs of greater length. Some have been provided to provincial superior court judges. Others are concerned with related matters: family violence, human trafficking, victims' rights, and various approaches to deal with traumatic results.
Access to NJI's internet site, which houses a series of videocasts on issues related to sexual assault cases. This suite of videos continues to grow. It includes not only videocasts on the laws, on the skills that judges need to manage their cases, but also the reality of vulnerable witnesses in sexual assault cases. I'm now going to talk a few minutes about the education for federally appointed judges and then provincially appointed judges, and I'll explain to you why I'm making that distinction. For the federally appointed judges, pursuant to the professional development policy of the Canadian Judicial Council, each judge is expected to take 10 days of education. Two kinds of programs are available: national programs, which the NJI designs and delivers, and then their own court-based programs, which we also assist in delivering. For new judges, within their first year of appointment, they are mandated to take 2 weeks of education, one spring, one fall. During that, about 10 days of education, 2 days are dedicated to criminal law, and that, of course, addresses in part sexual assault cases. In addition, they take a session on social context, and one of the parts of that addresses myths and stereotypes in sexual assault cases as well. Then in their second to fifth year, all federally appointed judges are expected or mandated to take a course called Judging in Your First 5 Years Criminal. And this is a 5-day course, start to finish, how to manage and run a criminal trial. And because sexual assault trials are technically very challenging trials, the hypothetical examples that run throughout the week that the judges use to practice their skills are both sexual assault hypotheticals. We've run this course twice now, 2019 and 2020 in January, and each time 60 newer federally appointed judges attended. In the course, the judges practice their skills, and these include how to address issues in cross-examination. So they watch on video a cross-examination of a complainant and an accused. They sit at tables with senior criminal judges and academics and discuss when the cross-examination went out of bounds, when lawyers were asking inappropriate questions like a complainant's past sexual history and so on, and how to manage those particular cases. In addition, during the week, to ensure that judges understand the needs of vulnerable witnesses, we have sessions that address particular groups. So on the past offering in January of this year, we were very fortunate that we had Commissioner Marian Buller, Counsel Krista Big Canoe, and Elder Kathy Louie, all of whom worked on the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Commission. And they talked to us about the challenges, the particular challenges that are facing Indigenous women who face an overrepresentation of violence, both sexual violence, family violence, from the historical issues that we all are so familiar with. The session was hosted by 2 Indigenous judges from British Columbia, Justice Len Marchand from the BC Supreme Court, and Judge Alex Wolf from the BC Provincial Court. There was also a session on children and children as witnesses because, of course, they have particular vulnerabilities. As this course develops throughout the years, we will be offering additional segments to the judges on other vulnerable witnesses, such as those with handicaps, recently arrived immigrants into Canada, and so on. In addition to this program, so this is a mandated program that the judges must take. From that point on, for the rest of their judicial career, they have available to them the curriculum from the NJI, which contains sessions and courses on sexual assault law. The criminal law course, annual, treats not only sexual assault cases, but also related issues. For example, in 2019, a portion of the criminal law course was on human trafficking, and of course, human trafficking can be for many things, and one of them is for sex. Evidence, again, a intensive course where judges work through hypotheticals. The criminal law hypothetical is a sexual assault case, a camp counselor, and one of his charges. We also do programs with the Canadian chapter of the International Association of Women's Judges that often treats these issues. In addition, the courts have their own programming, as I say, twice a year, and often issues involving sexual assault trials are part of those programs. Many of the courts have developed what they call 101 courses for their new judges so that they are able to give education to their judges quite soon after their importance. And one of the 101 courses that we assist with are on sexual assault cases. So that's a bit of a laundry list of what's available to the federally appointed judges. Let me turn to the provincial court judges now, because I think this is important. We estimate, we don't have exact figures, we estimate that about 95% of sexual assault cases are heard by provincial court judges. NJI works with the Ontario Court of Justice, and there is training in sexual assault trials within their training program. However, I think it's fair to say that for provincial and territorial judges, en gros, in total, they do not have access to the same amount of education because of a lack of resources from their governments. Provincial and territorial judges may attend NJI programs, but it's rather restricted. So, for example, the intensive program that I explained to you that's mandatory for federally appointed judges that addresses sexual assault cases in detail are not available to provincial court judges because of the funding mechanism for designing and delivering that course, and because of the demand we now have amongst our federal judges. They can attend other programs, but again, because of the funding model, their attendance is restricted. So in conclusion, I'd like to make 3 points. First of all, I think it's fair to say from my meeting with and working with judges across Canada every day, judges recognize the importance of education, recognize the importance of education in sexual assault cases, and particularly recognizing that they need to understand the context of all the people who come into their courtroom. Second, I think it's important that we as an institute, along with the Canadian Judicial Council, and recognize that provincial and territorial judges are in need of this training as well. They conduct most of the sexual assault cases in the country. And finally, the NJI, along with the CJC, is committed to working with the federal government as we can to strengthen our justice system in Canada. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to Mr. MacDonald.
Madam Chair, would I have a few minutes to...
Unfortunately, we're hitting the almost a minute and a half over for Justice Kent, and we must move to rounds of questioning. Perhaps what you would like to address, you can address as responses to the questions that will be asked.
All right, thank you.
So in the first round of questioning, we'll have 6 minutes per party. It'll go from Conservative to Liberal to Bloc to NDP, and then we'll go on to the second round should there be sufficient time. So we'll start with Mr. Maguire. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today, and it's great to hear your testimony on this bill. I'm very interested in the educational aspect that you clearly pointed out, both of you. And I guess it comes down to, Kent, you just mentioned that it's very important to provide the training both provincial and territorial levels as well, and the importance of education being recognized. So, having said that, I guess we hear a lot in the country about, where is the justice system at, the faith in the justice system, this sort of thing, restoration. Do you think this legislation goes far enough in restoring that faith in our justice system, given that the federal ombudsman for victims of crime has stated that there's only one of every 20 victims comes forward? It's about a 5% recovery of sexual violence contact law enforcement. So I'm just wondering if you see this as helping give confidence to more people coming forward.
I'll start, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague. I suppose any discussion about matters of sexual assault cases, ensuring that victims who have been assaulted, who have been wronged, come forward, ensuring that they are respected as they go through the process from their first contact with the police right through to the courtroom. It's important that they are assured that they are respected, they are treated with dignity, and that their cases are tried fairly. As a judge, I'm always reticent to comment on legislation. I think that's something that is in your domain, but I always welcome the chance to discuss it. But maybe, Mr. MacDonald, you may have something to say about the legislation.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the question. Confidence in the judiciary, like confidence in all our institutions, is fundamental. It's hugely important, and I believe, to answer your question, that this bill will go a long way to, and I too am concerned about the stark statistics about underreporting, will go a long way to give public confidence, confidence of the public, but also of victims of sexual assault. Another important aspect about confidence in the justice system is an independent judiciary. And the concern, if I could just take an opportunity, Madam Chair, to elaborate on that, the concern is that while all parties agree with the noble spirit of this legislation, not all policies will be agreed upon. There could be some controversial policies, and the concern we have is that when the language used in the bill, and we will provide you, Madam Chair, with a document of the bill with some very slight changes to highlight the importance. When the verbs are must and shall, you have to look at the specter of 5 or 10 years from now, or 10 or 20 years from now, and what if a government not so well-intentioned were to direct judges to learn about, let's say, the myth of the residential schools? Let's say there's a controversial policy and there's a reference made to the Supreme Court of Canada on a controversial policy. Pick whatever it may be, climate change, whatever policies are hotly debated now in Parliament. What if Parliament were to direct judges to say, we want you to learn about the myth of the Holocaust. We want you to learn about our version of climate change. We want you to learn about our version of this. That's the concern we have, and we are humbly suggesting that maybe the language could be tempered so that the verbs must and shall are not there, and the vision and the laudable goal of the legislation would still be met.
Yeah, thank you. And I caught your words in your opening comments about laudable goal, sir, as well. And so it leads kind of into the next question. I have Associate Professor at Dalhousie University, Elaine Craig, wrote a book about putting trials on trial. And she stated that judges can, through their demeanor, make the trial process more humane for sexual assault claimants that I just referred to, and without threatening the constitutional rights of the accused. So she outlined specific cases, as you did, Madam Kent, in regards to how these can be handled differently by judges in the training that you have and that sort of thing. So, I guess one question I have, is it possible to create that culture within the courtroom without having to do the legislation?
You have 30 seconds for a response.
Short answer is yes. I think that, as I said in my closing, judges are dedicated to ensuring that everybody is treated respectfully. When I was I only have another second to go, so I won't go into my past, but I think without the legislation, yes, judges know that they have to treat everybody with respect, and will take the education that is needed to do that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maguire. We're moving on to Mr. Maloney. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Justice Kent, Justice MacDonald, thank you very much for coming today. Your presentations are very informative, very helpful. I come from a background, I practiced before the courts in Ontario for 20 years. I grew up in a family with surrounded by people in the legal profession. I say that only because it gives me some insight. I happen to believe we have the greatest justice system in the world, and I firmly believe that. We live in a world now where people, journalists, politicians, the public, it's easy to pick one-off situations and use it to attack the system, and that is just fundamentally wrong in my opinion. And Justice MacDonald, I'm glad to say we're on top of this, because I really do believe we are. In Ontario, I know the education system for judges is top notch. I mean, you get judges appointed from a civil litigation background. They need to be trained on criminal procedure and some update on criminal law, or vice versa. And the training system we have is extraordinary, in my opinion. 40 years ago, when judges were appointed, they came from a general background. They practice all these different areas. They didn't need the training. Now they do. And this is the latest example. But we can't do anything that fetters the discretion of the judges. And that's why I'm very interested to hear what amendments you're going to propose. And I'm going to go through some of the language in the legislation in a moment. But the Act, and the preamble of the Act, it says survivors of sexual assault in Canada must have faith in the criminal justice system. Parliament recognizes the importance of the independence of the judiciary. That has to be paramount in anything that's done here. Maybe you could, I'll ask you, Justice McDonald, not fair to you, Justice Kent, if there's any specific amendments you would recommend right off the top. Like, I'm looking at some of the sections, for example, on the reporting of judges that go to seminars.
If we could hand out the, and I will stay within my time, Madam President, in terms of answer. I can answer that question a lot better with the handout. In the meantime, I can start by saying, let me get right to what the concern would be. The concern is that in 20 years from now, if the government of the day were to direct judges to learn about the myth of residential schools, you would want, or something else that was just not properly spirited. You would want the judiciary to stand bravely, courageously, and say, you can't teach us what to, you can't tell us what we have to learn. If you tell us what we have to learn, you tell us what we have to think, arguably. That's the concern. And we want to be able to tell that government, you can't do that. And we would not want the answer to be, well, actually, that was done in 2020. Judges were told with verbs like must and shall that they have to learn these things. So our main message is, first of all, as a result of Justice Kent's detailed description, trust us, we are on top of this. And secondly, we can still meet the spirit of this legislation by tempering the verbs so that we will be ably comply with the legislation without some future government trying to drive controversial educational initiatives down the throat of judges. I think that's the main concern. So if you look at...
Can I just interrupt for one second?
Absolutely.
I think part of that as well is and you touched on this too, the importance of the judges being the ones who create the curriculum
That's
and the
right.
ones who decide. And the reason for that is if you have people who are not involved in the system doing it, they cannot provide input with the necessary context and background of understanding the law and the legal system. And that's critical to determining what these programs should be. Similar, I would say that's the same as the point you're trying to make with respect to Parliament.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you. So very briefly, Madam Chair, I believe all members, honourable members, have the document. Thank you, Mr. Maloney, sir, for highlighting the preamble where it refers to importance of an independent judiciary. We would add that is free from improper influence. We would humbly suggest that the whereas that identifies problematic interpretations of the law may arise. This is positive legislation. We see this as a positive thing. Respectfully, that is a negative preamble. We have a robust appeal process, and that is an unnecessary entry into the preamble. Then if you continue on, and I'll do so very briefly, in 2C, we're simply saying should instead of shall. Again, that would ensure that in 20 years' time, we can tell a government which would not be so well-intentioned that, you know, there's no precedent for saying you shall. Again, if you turn to on page 3, 2B, include where it says include, and we would add where the council finds appropriate. Again, as you have indicated, Ms. Maloney, just as Justice Kent has so ably identified, that it has to be judges who find it appropriate so that we are not subject to undue influence. And again, 62.1, where the minister asks the council, again, soft language, less mandatory language, should instead of must in 62.1. And then 62.1 brackets 2 refers to any report received.
Justice McDonald, I'm so
Yes.
sorry, but we're out of the time. I'm sure we'll continue in the next round, perhaps.
For the opportunity, Madam President, to answer that question and to thank you very much for that question.
Thank you. Monsieur Fortin, you have 6 minutes.
Merci. Merci.
Thank you. Thank you to Justice Kent, MacDonald. I understand your testimony here today. You have expressed some concerns as to the training of judges, provincial level judges named by the provinces, and of course what we've just spoken about, which is the independence of the judiciary. These points are also of concern to me. I'm quite aware of them. However, I make a small distinction. Those judges appointed by the province or territories shouldn't suffer any cramping of their rights by the federal government. However, on judiciary independence, I'm very interested in hearing what you have to say. I have some questions, some clarifications, but with the document that you've just provided, I think you've made yourself very clear. Perhaps you would like to confirm for us that you're inviting us to have faith in the structures of the judiciary, CJC and JI, and the court system itself. Being a lawyer myself, I do trust our legal system, and I share Mr. Maloney's opinion that we have perhaps the best judicial system in the world, justice system in the world. The distinction you seem to have made is that you're ready to grant us the confidence in the magistrature, in the judiciary, or perhaps by preference to the legislators. So what are we to do of democracy, if you will, citizens' rights? To elect their legislators, to represent them in Parliament, and that Parliament can influence issues of social concern. Is there not some inherent contradiction or conflict here in the democratic process?
Je voudrais parler en anglais, si vous voulez.
Ah oui, no problem.
Merci beaucoup. Well, thank you very much and for identifying the issues as we have highlighted them, and for raising the issue of your our provincial and territorial court colleagues, because we want to work with those involved, everyone involved, the National Judicial Institute, the provincial court chiefs, the federal court chiefs, and of course the Minister of Justice and the Department of Justice, to make this laudable, again, repeat, laudable goal a reality, not just for federally appointed judges who hear only a small percentage of sexual assault cases, but for all Canadian judges. And we stand ready to work together. We have a wonderful history of cooperation within the judiciary and working together. And I must say, as has been stated earlier, I too believe we have the best justice system in the world, and that justice system respects boundaries, respects judicial independence, I respect, as Chief Justice, respect entirely the fact that you are the guardians of the public purse, but yet we require you to support us and to support an independent judiciary. But in Canada, we can still collaborate and work together and keep our independence. And that's essentially one of our messages today, is that we would like to work with Parliament to make sure that this is available for every Canadian judge, not just federally appointed judges. And I thank you very much for your question, sir.
Mais c'était pas tellement ce point.
Well, it wasn't particularly that focus point to my question. I do share the concern. As I said, there's provincial jurisdiction involved here, and I'm sure that the provinces will adopt measures that are appropriate for their judges. The question really is can you help me understand is there not, in the position you're taking this morning, a little bit of a contradiction? You're asking the public to trust the justice system, which self-evident, no problem, but to the detriment, perhaps, of the democratic process, which allows legislators to provide, like in Bill C-5, to provide this training for judges. I'm not too sure if I can grasp that. Does the citizen withdraw this capacity of legislators to legislate at the behest of the independence of the judiciary? Well, it's an excellent question, and I do understand.
And we live in a constitutional democracy, not a parliamentary democracy. And a constitutional democracy dictates that your laws, as all of you know, have to be constitutional. And a constitutional imperative is that the judiciary has to be independent and cannot be subjected, especially to government. But to your point, are we therefore encroaching on your democratic obligations? And I think, again, that's where Canada shines. I think we balance well. You require comfort. We have an accountable judiciary. Let's think about it. We have a robust appeal process. We have a very robust, I chaired it for 5 years, a judicial conduct process. Everything we say and do is on the record in court. And and Justice Kent can elaborate on this, we are much more open and transparent about our educational offerings in the past 2 years, and perhaps Justice Kent. So I understand your point that we can't, it cuts both ways. We can't say we're so independent we are going to subsume Parliament's obligation. Not at all. What we are saying is in a constitutional democracy, we need the appropriate balance, and our proposed changes, I think, I would respectfully submit, strike that balance. But Justice Kent can talk about what we view as openness.
I think the
So
chair.
sorry,
may
we
differ.
are
Sorry.
really strapped for time. My apologies. Perhaps Justice Kent can address that with some of the upcoming questions. Moving on to Alistair McGregor. It's just your turn, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Justice Kent, Justice McDonald, thank you so much for coming with us today. I am detecting the struggle that both of you are having with this subject, because I know you want to maintain the principle of judicial independence, and you've stressed very much that these educational programs are happening, they're being led by judges, and that's the way it should be. But at the same time, we as the people's representatives have heard from our constituents and from Canadian society that there is this loss of faith in our justice system. We see judges who have quite recently used discredited myths and stereotypes when making their rulings. They've used insensitive language. And I guess I just want to sort of tack on to the last line of questioning about, you've made your proposed amendments to Bill C-5. Is it your view that this bill is necessary? Or, I mean, you've talked about the laudable goals of C-5, but are you quite happy with the bill being presented to us? Like, is Parliament fulfilling its obligation with it?
Let me start by reminding you or telling you about one of the obligations that I think the NJI has. The Supreme Court of Canada has made quite clear to judges in Canada that they must understand the context of the people in their courtroom. One of the most recent examples was the witness who wanted to testify in a sexual assault case wearing her religious garb covering part of her face. And the Supreme Court says you have to balance her rights against the accused rights, and looking at a number of situations. So what I see the NJI's role is ensuring that we have consultation with the community. And I can tell you that when the first bill was introduced, Bill 337 in the last Parliament, I had hours of consultations with groups that worked with victims, survivors of sexual assault, talking to them. We now have one of our video casts where we have three representatives of groups who work with vulnerable witnesses talk about the experiences of those people in the courtroom, the experiences of them in the courtroom, in the community, their experiences as survivors of sexual assault. So I see that as one of the ways that we ensure that what you're hearing in the community, we also respond to.
Mm-hmm. Justice Kent, you appeared before the Status of Women Committee in 2017 when Bill C-337 was appearing, and I've gone over the witness testimony. That was nearly 3 years ago. C-337, for a variety of reasons, unfortunately did not become law in the 42nd Parliament, but here we are trying again. It's been nearly 3 years since you gave your testimony on that bill, and here you are again. Can you maybe explain to the committee, in the 3 years that has passed, have there been any noticeable changes in the style and content of training for judges?
Absolutely. Okay. The course I talked about, Judging in Your First 5 Years Criminal, that was created, I won't say completely in response to Bill 337, but partially in response to Bill 337, and it is now a mandatory course for newer appointed judges. That has changed as a result of the CJC policy and the program that we offer. The suite of videocasts that I talked about that is ever growing on sexual assault trials, that is new, and that is available to all judges, including provincially appointed judges, because it's digitally transmitted. And I think it's fair to say, as I said in my remarks, that all of the courts who we work with have done programs in sexual assault cases. Certainly in the past 3 years that we have seen that happen. So I think there is a attention being given to the issues that have been raised as a part of this discussion.
Thank you. And I think I'll just get in a last question here, just for the Canadian Judicial Council. C5 stipulates that the courses have to be developed in consultation with persons, groups, or organizations that the Canadian Judicial Council considers appropriate. Can you inform this committee how you decide who is appropriate, how you decide who to consult on these matters?
Excellent question, and in line with earlier discussion, and Justice Kent is abundantly aware of this because she does it every day. We have to make a clear distinction between advocates and educators. So we can't hear from advocates on either side, because that just wouldn't be our role as it applies to independence. But we need education. And as far as things change, and Mr. Kellaway will be interested in this from Nova Scotia, that when I was Chief Justice, we brought our judges to the African Nova Scotian community and we said, what's it like for you to go to court? How many bus transfers does it take for you to get from Preston to court? It's a $50 cab ride. Cabs won't come to your community. Maybe if you're late for court, we will better understand the challenges you face. We've met with the Mi'kmaq community, and we are trying to find that balance where we remain independent, but we don't hear from advocacy groups. We hear from educators. We hear from elders. We hear from people who understand, and we explain to them about judicial independence. So, wow, things have really changed in 24 years that I've been on the bench, and I think we are moving in the right direction. I appreciate the question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that ends your time, Mr. McGregor. We have 6 minutes left, and we have a full other round of questioning. So two options that I recommend to our committee members. We can have 1 minute per round, or I can open it up for rapid fire questions to anybody who has a question that they would like to ask, so we can use the 6 minutes in a kind of a consensus base. I leave it to you guys to decide. Yes, Jack? Ms. Ohota?
I'd like to thank the witnesses for being
Sorry,
here.
hold on, Ms. Hota. We were just discussing how we were going to split up the
just
rest
a question.
of the.
I thought
yes.
it was a question.
No.
Okay.
So are we okay to do whoever has questions? If I can just canvass the room who has questions. I know Pam does. Well, that's a lot of you. Yeah, I think we're gonna have to do 3 and 3 then. If, Monsieur Fortin, Mr. McGregor, no. Okay, so 3 minutes to split amongst the Conservatives. Okay, all right, Mr. Hota, you're up then.
Okay.
3 minutes.
Just want to thank the witnesses for being here. Appreciate your time and presentation. My question is in regards to the seminars and training sessions that have been created. Could you speak to the requirement, and is it attendance-based, exam, any follow-ups?
For the 2 weeks of new judges training, now this is all federally appointed judges, the 2 weeks are mandatory, and there's no follow-up, there's no exams, but it is mandatory for all of the judges to attend. There's a lot of skills training. So, you ask if there's exams, I say no, but there's a lot of work in tables with facilitators, with senior judges who work with the judges. So they are constantly practicing. The judging in your first 5 years course, the intensive on sexual assault cases, that is mandatory for all judges somewhere in their 2nd to 5th year. All other training is at the decision of the judge and his or her Chief Justice, but they are expected to take 10 days of education every year.
Okay. In regards to, we know this bill speaks to mandatory training and education for lawyers seeking appointments. Do you have any support for sitting judges?
The work we do is with sitting judges.
Okay.
All of our training is with the sitting judges.
Okay. Thank you. Bill, do you want to?
Thank you very much. It's truly a privilege as a member of the Ontario Bar to be in the same room as such esteemed justices. That being said, we've certainly seen in the United States, and we've also seen the SNC-Lavalin affair, the inappropriateness of having too much influence over the judiciary. However, as also on the counterpoint, we've seen, as my colleague pointed out, some troubling comments by the judiciary. But we've also talked about training going forward. Can the Canadian public feel confident that justices across this country will not make the same type of comments, such as talking about the sexual history or even talking about how women could have possibly avoided sexual assault by saying such terrible things as they could have maneuvered their pelvis differently?
We can never give a guarantee, but I can guarantee, one guarantee is that we are doing our darndest on a number of fronts to see that was so upsetting to everybody, and you can rest assured that we are daily conscious of this, and we'll do our very best.
And let me just add that part of the training, I spoke about our session in our judging in your first 5 years course, where we had Krista Big Canoe come and talk about the missing and murdered Indigenous women. If you've ever watched her submissions to the Supreme Court of Canada in the Barton case, where she talked about Cindy Gladue, she spoke with that same force in front of our judges, and that was education. That's the kind of education that we provide to our judges, and we recognize the importance of that.
Thank you very much, Justice Kent. Ms. Demoff.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of questions. If we do not make the changes that you've recommended, do you feel that Parliament is interfering with the judiciary?
Respectfully, we have concerns as it applies to judicial independence.
Okay.
Of course, in the Canadian way, we would like to have a compromise, and the compromise would be less mandatory language and still achieve the spirit of the legislation.
Okay. And Justice Kent, it's really nice to see you here again. We had a fairly robust conversation when we looked at the bill last time about making sure that sexual assault also takes into account sexual expression and gender expression, Indigenous peoples, disability, ethnicity, and came to the conclusion that the best wording to use in the legislation was social context. I'm wondering if you can just assure us that when you're looking at social context in your sexual assault training, that those individuals who are most vulnerable are being included. I was really heartened to hear you have reached out to the groups that I know had asked you to during our previous itineration. So I think we want to have some confidence that social context does include that particular view.
It's a work in progress. I don't want to say that we've covered all of those bases absolutely up to now, but so for example, a video cast that we've just launched includes Neka McGregor, Deepa Matu, and Fran Odette, all of whom are heading groups that work with vulnerable witnesses, whether it's Indigenous, racialized women, women with disabilities, and so on. So we're in the process of doing that. I can't say it's all done as of today, but we are working on it. I can give you that confidence.
And I agree that our criminal justice system is the best in the world, but we have failed survivors of sexual assault. And I also, it's not just judges, it's police services, and it supports throughout the system. And I would argue that we've also failed a number of survivors of intimate partner violence or domestic assault. Justice Kent, is there a need for more training around intimate partner violence?
We do training for, I call it domestic or family violence because we know how it affects the whole family. We do some training. It's a little complicated. We won't get into it here because of the provincial jurisdiction of some of the legislation involved. But could we do more? Absolutely. I think it's important. It intersects with sexual violence as well, and it's important training that we need to do.
I think that's all the time I've got, isn't it?
If you want to sneak something in, but
I don't think there's really time. Thank you.
So with that, I would really like to thank the witnesses for your very thoughtful remarks today. We really appreciate having your input. And I'm going to suspend the meeting as we switch our witnesses, and I'm sure the members will get a chance to say hello to you in person.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members.
Thank you.
to the second hour of this Justice meeting discussing Bill C-5. We're honored to have Minister Lametti, our Minister of Justice and the Attorney General of Canada, here to talk about this. We also have department officials Nancy Othmar and Stephen Zalewski. Welcome to our committee. So without further ado, I pass it to Minister Lametti for your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to all of you for being here today. Merci à vous tous d'être ici. I'm pleased to be here today to speak to you about Bill C-5, an act to amend the Judges Act and the Criminal Code. Bill C-5 proposes amendments ensuring all newly appointed provincial and territorial superior court judges participate in continuing education in sexual assault law and social context. Further, it would require the Canadian Judicial Council to report on the participation of all sitting Superior Court judges in sexual assault law education. Finally, the bill would also require judges to provide reasons in writing or on the record for decisions in sexual assault matters. The underlying objective of Bill C-5 is to enhance public confidence and, in particular, the confidence and trust of survivors of sexual assault that the criminal justice system will treat them fairly. It is to reassure them that when they do come forward, they will be treated with dignity and respect by judges who have the knowledge, skills, and sensitivity to correctly apply what is a very complex and nuanced area of the law. The bill serves as an example of parliamentary collaboration. We have our former colleague and previous Conservative Party leader, the Honourable Rona Ambrose, to thank for this. I want to start by recognizing her initiative on this critical issue. Ms. Ambrose's private member's Bill C-337 started the conversation about the need for judicial training in the area of sexual assault law and the imperative for elected officials to do what they can do to support this. Bill C-5 was informed and inspired by Bill C-337. The criminal justice system has long faced challenges in responding to sexual assault in Canada. Much progress has been made by both our government and previous governments in bringing forward reforms aimed at enhancing the equality, privacy, and security rights of complainants by countering the myths and stereotypes that have persisted in our criminal justice system. These reforms have, at the same time, balanced the rights of the accused in a manner consistent with the relevant Supreme Court of Canada jurisprudence. Cependant, malgré la robustesse de notre cadre,
nonetheless, despite the robustness of our judicial framework in this matter, we also see that there are extreme underreporting of these charges and convictions in the cases of sexual assault. One of the main reasons is that the victims of sexual assault fear they will not be believed, they will be humiliated, or they will be criticized. These fears are reinforced by the way that the media covers these issues, or by judges or others or other actors in the justice system who will act in a like fashion. And these behaviors have seriously undermined the confidence of Canadians in our Canadian system of justice.
To increase public confidence and trust in the ability of our criminal justice system to hear cases in a manner that is fair, respectful, treats people with dignity, and above all, is in accordance with the law that has been carefully developed to ensure this. Judicial independence is critical to public confidence and a core constitutional principle. Judicial independence requires judicial control over the training and education of judges. A bill that seeks to enhance public confidence in the justice system cannot achieve its goal if, at the same time, it undermines public confidence in judicial independence. Le projet de loi dont nous sommes saisis.
Thus, the bill that we are looking at includes modifications or amendments that stemmed originally in Bill C-337 by our committee. This has been developed in order to respond to the concerns expressed by the judiciary and other actors and stakeholders who felt that the initial bill, went beyond the limits of judiciary independence. The proposed amendments would bring necessary adjustments to the bill and respect these underlying objectives.
Professionally competent and highly regarded judiciaries in the world. I know members have just heard about the work of the Canadian Judicial Council and the National Judicial Institute with regards to their internationally recognized work on judicial education. This bill in no way targets or undermines the credibility or respect our Superior Court judiciary rightly deserves. Rather, it seeks to balance the legitimate need to enhance public confidence while carefully preserving the judiciary's ability to control judicial education. J'aimerais aborder les éléments clés du projet de loi.
I would now like to deal with the key elements of this bill. Firstly, this bill will modify the Judges Act, establishing new criteria for the appointment of judges to Superior Court. According to the bill, in order to be admissible to this type of appointment, the individual candidates, if named, must commit to follow a training in the rights concerning sexual aggression and the social context. These amendments will guarantee that the government knows that its candidates, newly appointed to the bench, will have received such a training and that judicial independence will be respected. There will not be any training imposed on judges.
Sexual assault training established by the CJC be developed after consultation with survivors of sexual assault, the groups that support them, or with other groups and individuals that the Council considers appropriate. The requirement to consult is intended to ensure that judicial education will be balanced and informed by the experiences of individuals affected. It is left up to the Council to determine who precisely it consults and determine the content of the training to respect the constitutional principle of judicial independence. Bill C-5 requires the Canadian Judicial Council to provide to the Minister for tabling in Parliament an annual report containing details of seminars offered on matters relating to sexual assault law and on the number of judges attending. This measure is intended to enhance accountability in the education of sitting judges for sexual assault law and act as an incentive to encourage the participation of current Superior Court judges in sexual assault law education. Le dernier élément du projet de loi porte sur les amendements.
The final element of this bill deals with amendments to the Criminal Code. The aim here is to ensure that decisions in cases of sexual assault are not unduly influenced by myths and stereotypes as proposed by the victims of sexual assault and how they should behave. The Supreme Court of Canada has clearly expressed that these myths and stereotypes distort the function of seeking the truth before the courts. Canadians and victims of sexual assault must know that we have robust laws on the matter and that these are been implemented adequately and appropriately in their decisions. This is why C-5 requires that judges provide in writing and for the record the grounds of or reasons for their decisions that they give in these cases of sexual assault. These provisions will prevent the erroneous application of laws relative to sexual assault and contribute to an improvement of the transparency and accountability of judicial decisions rendered in these affairs. It has also been suggested that this bill does not deal with the actual core issue, that is, decisions rendered by judges of provincial appointed courts. It's true that to a certain degree, 80% of these sexual assault cases are in fact heard by provincial or territorial courts. So the Canadian Parliament has no authority to legislate conditions on provincial or territorial appointed judges. It cannot influence those cases which are of most consequence. However, this does not hinder or impede Parliament or other actors to do what they can to ensure that their system is equitable, fair and equitable.
Judiciary in the provinces and territories to take a careful look at their own legislative framework and suite of policies and programs, and consider if there are additional measures that can be taken to address the same concerns in their own relative jurisdictions. Following Ms. Ambrose's introduction of the former Bill C-37, a number of jurisdictions followed suit and did just that. At least one province, Prince Edward Island, enacted similar legislation, and I understand Saskatchewan and others are carefully considering policy and legislative responses. I have sent a letter to my provincial and territorial colleagues outlining the initiatives in Bill C-5 in the hopes that all will follow suit, and I have instructed the Department of Justice Canada officials to explore options for increased availability of training for provincially and territorially appointed judges. Our government has committed significant resources to support the availability of enhanced judicial training. In Budget 2017, the Canadian Judicial Council was provided with $2.7 million over 5 years and $500,000 per year thereafter to ensure that more judges have access to professional development, with a greater focus on gender and culturally sensitive training. As I already noted, an important objective of Bill C-5 is to restore the confidence of public and survivors in the ability of the criminal justice system to hear sexual assault cases in a manner that is fair, dignified, and respects the statutory framework that Parliament has set out. Bill C-5 will send a message to all Canadians and survivors of sexual assault in particular that Parliament is firmly committed and prepared to act to ensure a justice system that all Canadians can trust, especially the most vulnerable. But action must happen at all levels of government. It is my hope that Bill C-5 will be a catalyst for all jurisdictions and judiciaries in Canada to consider what measures can be taken that go beyond the symbolic and will result in meaningful and sustainable changes to the manner in which people are treated by the criminal justice system. Voilà qui conclut mes observations.
This concludes my formal remarks. I'll, of course, be quite pleased to answer any questions that members of the committee might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Lametti, for your remarks. For going on to our first round of questioning, starting with Mr. Moore, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Minister, for appearing here today on this important bill, and thank you for the recognition of the role that the Honourable Rona Ambrose played in the bill getting here to this point. We Conservatives are pleased to support this legislation, and as we enter this phase of the committee doing its work, it's important for us to take a strong look at the legislation and hear from witnesses and hear from yourself on the bill. One of the a couple of the witnesses that we just heard from, the Canadian Judicial Council and the National Judicial Institute. I know you mentioned in your remarks the importance of judicial independence, and that was a theme of some of that conversation. And they've put forward a proposal of softening some of the mandatory language in the bill. For example, where it says shall, replacing it with should. Can you comment on their proposal in the name of judicial independence?
Okay. Well, first of all, I thank you, Mr. Moore, for your question, and I thank you for your party's support for the bill. I think that's important to outline at the outset. The second thing that's important to outline at the outset is the really good work that both the CJC and the NGI do to help create what I think is the best judiciary in the world, and I think what a number of experts around the world think is one of the best judiciaries in the world. So they already do a great deal of very good work in order to improve the quality of our judicial decisions and frankly help raise the standard of the judiciary. I haven't seen those proposals yet. There's enough sort of ministerial hubris to say that you think every bill that you put out is perfect, but obviously we will look carefully at those proposals, and we will also hear what you have to say when your committee comes back.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Another question, Honourable Justice Michael MacDonald, asking for trust in this body to implement without without the imposition, without the language around mandatory. So I think that's something that an important testimony that we take note of. Justice McDonald raises a concern that this bill starts a trend whereby there be more and more mandatory courses for judges. That's not a trend I don't think that I would like to see come to fruition. We know that there is a great deal of training for our judges. How do we, do you think that's a legitimate concern, and how do we keep that in check in light of the paramount role that our judges play and the importance of judicial independence in our entire system, if sending the message that this wouldn't begin a trend whereby new mandatory training take place for our judges on different issues?
Right. I will admit that I'm less worried about a trend, I think. In fact, I'm not worried at all. First and foremost, the principle of judicial independence is well entrenched in our Canadian legal system. And I think we have tried in this particular bill, and Ms. Ambrose did in her original private member's bill, to respect that very principle of judicial independence, and I think we have succeeded. But secondly, we also have to remember the context in which this private member's bill came out. There were a couple of very high-profile, say, cases, both at the provincial court level, in which I think things were said in the course of the decision in the course of the trial that demonstrated that more training was needed. So I think this is a particular response to a particularly delicate challenge and a particularly significant challenge in terms of equality, in terms of treating the victims of sexual assault fairly and sensitively, and I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about that as an across-the-board problem.
Thank you, Minister. Okay, Minister, in the minute I have remaining, do you or your officials have any examples now of groups, organizations that would be consulted on the seminars relating to sexual assault that will be established? Is there some notion of what groups you'd like to see consulted on those seminars?
Well, again, the final decision will rest with the CJC. At best, we could suggest there are a number of groups that have traditionally worked with survivors of sexual assault, and we would expect that those various groups would be amongst those, but there would be others too.
Thanks, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Moving on to Ms. Demoff, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for being here today, and I have to say it's a real privilege to be working on this bill for the second time. I know it's slightly different this time, but it was important then, and it's important now, and I applaud you for bringing it forward. You mentioned the funding in budget 2017 for videos, and it's interesting, in 2017, Justice Kent mentioned she was looking forward to producing them. Today she told us how they're produced, and she's also consulted with groups that we felt were strongly she should consult with. So there's been a lot of really positive progress made. In the bill, what kind of safeguards? We had a fairly robust discussion last time about social context, what's the right wording for legislation, and we want to make sure that the training is not just about sexual assault, but also ensures that sexual assault for the most vulnerable, Indigenous women, people who express with a different gender identity, for LGBTQ. What is in the bill to ensure that it's intersectional and culturally competent?
Well, I think, again, that as I responded a moment ago to Mr. Moore, it is ultimately up to the CJC and then working with the NJI to ultimately decide what goes in the training. What we're doing here is we're suggesting that terms like social context as a term, and again, there's no magic in that term, in the sense that if there are other suggestions around the table, we will look at them. But we can suggest, and then the CJC will take that on and they will incorporate the people that they wish to incorporate. They will consult with the people that they wish to consult. There's a lot of good faith here. There's a lot of good faith in this room. There's a lot of good faith on the part of the CJC, and there's a lot of good faith on the bench. And I think we shouldn't underestimate that. We will respect the principle of judicial independence. The CJC will try to get at the very concepts that you've identified in your question, and try to train judges accordingly. What we have done is make sure that through the nomination process in this particular bill, ensure that judges newly nominated will have engaged on their own to take on this training as a measure of assuring that this will happen.
And actually, social context, that wording came from the legislative clerk. So it wasn't the committee that came up with that. It was one that the legislative clerk at the time said was most encompassing. And actually hearing what we heard today, I'm actually pretty confident that what we intended is actually being done in the education. I was really pleased to hear what we heard. I have a question as a non-lawyer. I know the answer, but other people who may look at the bill may not. There's a provision in the bill that judges have to enter their reasoning into the record of proceedings, or if the proceedings are not recorded, written reasoning. Can you maybe explain to the non-lawyers what the record of proceedings is?
That's a more technical question, and even though you're a non-lawyer, you've asked a question knowing you know what the answer is, which is actually the mark of a lawyer. But that's never ask a question to which you don't know the answer. I'm happy to turn over the more technical answer to either Nancy or Stephen.
Hi, thank you for the question. I'll let Stephen correct me if I'm wrong on this. It really just means that the judge can orally give the reasons and included in the record of the proceedings for that. So it's a verbal reason.
One of the reasons that was important to have was because in some of the cases that were the impetus for the bill, it was difficult. It was several years, in fact, before they actually found out what was said during the trial. So that was, I think, the reason why that was included in the original private member's bill from Ms. Ambrose.
Yes, I'll just add on that. The purpose is ensuring that the reasons are in the record one way or the other, whether by the transcript of the oral proceeding or by the written reasons that a judge would provide. There had been some consideration to including the requirement for written reasons in all cases. For Jordan-related and other delay reasons, that would have bogged down the process too heavily, and so that's why it covers off both options, including the recorded version.
Thank you. You don't have a lot of time, so I'll try to get to it quickly, but this is a little bit outside of the actual bill. But when we studied it before, the head of the Disabled Women's Network of Canada talked about the importance of diversity on the bench. And I just wondered if you could speak in a minute about the changes that have been made so that the bench actually is more reflective. We're not there yet, but more reflective of Canadian society.
Well, we are trying to have a more diverse bench. I won't go into the detail right now unless somebody else asks me, but the point of it is that people will feel more confident when they see a bench that reflects them, when they see actors in the judicial system that reflects them, however they conceive themselves, and might share common experiences. It has been the case that shared experience is what's critical. That forms a bridge between the people who are formally actors in the judicial system, such as judges, and the people who appear before them. And that bridge is absolutely critical to the confidence that people have in the system.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Damoff. Monsieur Fortin, 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister Lametti, thank you very much for being with us today. We've heard two witnesses earlier today, which has really focused on the awareness raising of the judicial body. We feel that there should be there should be so, and there should be also independence of the judiciary in our democratic society. Judges MacDonald and Kent have pointed out some of the issues with Article 3 on the Judges Act, where the council must ensure that the seminars will deal with certain issues. And at the little b of this article, the council will ensure that the training deals with the underlying principles of consent, the issues of truth, as well as the myths and stereotypes of victims. Now, that's the actual wording. Now, Judges Kent and MacDonald would like to say that we, and I quote, where they appoint an appropriate judge, unquote, and the following wording of what should be taught. So when it's appropriate, I know that it's not your amendments, it's not your bill per se, but have you ever seen situations where these principles should not be part of training? Well, as I said to your colleague, Mr. Moore, this is the first time I have heard such suggestions. And of course, we'll take them under advisement and study them carefully. As you can see in the wording of the current article or amendment in the bill, these are issues that are at the same time quite technical and at the same time extremely significant because they target very specific myths and challenges posed to the system. In our current experience, in the appointment process of judges, we could have an appointee who has very little experience in the subject matter here. He or she might come from another area of the law, but as a judge of a superior court, might be assigned a sexual assault case. So we have to ensure from the onset that judges have adequate training, be aware and sensitive to an issue which is quite technical in law and yet very sensitive from a social context point of view. I believe we have the same objective, but I'd like to take a look at these proposals much more closely. So in your opinion, these issues must be dealt with in training programs that we offer to new judges. And I'm not putting words in your mouth here, but insofar as I am the minister, I have to respect, and I do respect, the independence of the judiciary. So we have to find ways and means in working together with the council and the institute that judges do receive training. Do you have the impression that the current wording of this paragraph would undermine judicial independence? I don't think so, no, because it only applies to individual candidates who seek to be appointed judge, and they only come into effect when the individual, he or she, decides to offer their application. So it's a contractual agreement. The individual who wants the position will comply with a request to undertake such training. So it's nothing that's being imposed. But you talk about continuing education. Well, once again, it's a personal commitment that the individual will make prior to appointments. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fortin. Mr. McGregor.
Chair, thank you, Minister, for appearing. You know, we know from recent decisions that there are discredited myths and stereotypes that have been used, and thus we see the necessity of Bill C-5. But I just want to say from the outset, too, that, you know, complainants of sexual assault are also facing inadequate social supports. They have inadequate information about the court process, and they're often confronted with a system that ignores the wishes and their complaints. So, C5 by itself is not going to solve all these problems, and I hope your government and your provincial colleagues are recognizing the systemic issues that also need to be addressed, certainly within the supports. I have a question about the differences between Bill C5 and Bill C337, because C337 went through the House of Commons with unanimous consent. Your department, I know you weren't the minister at the time, but your department at the time gave its consent to 337 going through. It did come with some amendments in the Senate, and C5 more closely represents the version of the bill that made it through the Senate's Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee. There are some noticeable parts that are different. So under C337, judicial appointments would have been required to complete judicial training at the satisfaction of the Commissioner for Federal Judicial Affairs. C5 now omits this. In the reporting requirements, C337 included a section where the number of sexual assault cases heard by judges who have never participated in seminars would also have to be included in the reports. Minister, can you explain why it is that these changes made their way into C5 and what changed in the 3 years? Because your government originally assented to these being in C337, and now we don't see them in C5. So I'd just like to explain the department's position on this.
Yeah, look, I wasn't the minister at the time this happened. All of this was done both through this committee, the work of this committee, and the Senate committee, where we worked very closely with senators. In general, we're looking for training as well as better reporting as a way of seeing how well this has been taken on by judges. But on more technical matters, I think I could leave the question to Stephen.
Sure. I'll just follow up briefly to say, as the committee has been discussing with the previous witnesses and with the minister, the question is finding the right balance between the judicial independence principle and the encouragement that the government is trying to ensure through the legislation it's bringing forward. So the first important change being the difference between applying the legislation to sitting judges as it would have originally, as opposed to candidates for judicial appointment. And again, that's clearly designed to recognize the judicial control over judicial education for sitting judges, and so moving it to an undertaking as opposed to and so that change that was moved in the Senate, the government is now supporting as reflecting a better balance. Likewise, on the reporting requirement, in terms of the level of detail, originally in 337 there was discussion of the number of sexual assault cases in particular that had been heard by judges who hadn't undergone the training and so on. There was a sense in the evidence from witnesses that could be perceived as targeting members of the judiciary, and so moving to a softer reporting requirement in the sense of not being seen to potentially single out particular courts or particular judges, but reporting on quantum numbers was a more appropriate approach for striking an appropriate balance.
But would we be singling them out if we're just reporting on the numbers, like if they were anonymous?
I wouldn't be singling them out by name, but I think that the idea of reporting more globally was consistent with what the government had done in C58 in terms of the way expenses were being reported at an aggregate level, and so moving it towards a better balance between respecting judicial independence.
Thank you. And I want to get one last question in. Minister, there are other federal decision-making bodies which have profound influence on people's lives. I can think of the Parole Board of Canada, the Immigration and Refugee Board. This bill goes after the Judges Act, but is there room maybe for the federal government to consider mandatory training through legislation for these other federal bodies?
I think it's fair to say that is an idea that a government ought to consider and that our government ought to consider. I would say not in this legislation, in part because it's not within my mandate.
Sure.
But also the principle of judicial independence is quite particular to judges, and there would be different architectural features and possibilities that would be possible in both of those both the examples that you've raised. And so there would be different ways to perhaps do things more directly in those cases that don't exist here.
And will you be speaking to your respective colleagues on those matters?
I would be happy to speak to my respective colleagues on that.
Thank you. That's it, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Just being cognizant of time, I will, for the second round of questioning, reduce the time to 3 minutes per person. I hope that's okay with you. Moving to the Conservatives, I have Mr. Lawrence on the list for 3 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for agreeing to appear, Minister. The justices expressed in their testimony prior to yours over and over, and we've talked about a fair bit about the concern of independence. And do you believe, Minister, that given the Ethics Commissioner's findings in the SNC-Lavalin affair, that your government is well positioned to protect judicial independence?
I think we're extremely well positioned to protect judicial independence. The principle is well entrenched. I share that opinion with the justices that I have. I had the good fortune of clerking at the Supreme Court for Justice Peter Corey, and I saw firsthand, in a very intense way, the manner in which justices exercise their judicial independence. And I respect that principle quite firmly, and I think so does our government.
Yeah, and I'll follow up also on my colleague's comments there. We've got a reporting mechanism within 60 days and to find out if the training is happening. But how does the department expect to find out whether we're really having impact? Of course, this was the result of we have an amazing justice system, but of some inappropriate insensitivities. And how are we going to measure that going forward?
Well, I think we will have aggregate statistics about the number of judges who have been trained. We will be comfortable in the knowledge that newly appointed judges will be trained. We will have extrinsic evidence, such as other provinces taking on training schemes within their jurisdiction for provincially appointed judges. And hopefully we'll see in the reporting of decisions and in the popular media's reporting of the decisions that these kinds of cases hopefully will not continue to exist or will be much more isolated. And I think all of those factors will be things that point to success.
So just to follow up on that, and I understand it's a difficult question due to judicial independence, but there'll be no monitoring or complaints system that we would look at to see whether insensitivities occurred in the courtroom.
Look, it's up to judges to train their cohort. That's part of the principle of judicial independence. We can look at reported decisions as other jurists or other people in the system, and we can look at and the media will do that too. So all of those parts of our functioning justice system will perform their roles, and I'm confident that we will get to a better place.
Thank you. Mr. Zuberi, you have 3 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre d'être ici.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for your appearance. You've discussed issues on how this might contribute to the,
backgrounds, including Indigenous backgrounds, people who are Black, South Asians, and other communities. So can you speak a bit to how diversification of the bench could help out with in the spirit of C5?
Thank you for that question. First of all, let me say that in terms of diversification of the bench, we've put into place a transparent system for naming judges with judicial appointment committees that are rigorously both trying to attract diverse candidates to apply and then analyzing their candidacies, and then hopefully a fair number of people will pass that stage and then be eligible for appointments. On a personal level, everywhere I go across Canada, at virtually every speaking engagement that I have had since becoming minister, I try to get people both to apply to the bench and to apply to the judicial appointment committees, because for a lawyer who hasn't been out for 10 years, critically important that they consider doing volunteer work on the Judicial Action Committee, Judicial Appointments Committee, in order to attract good, diverse candidates. Diversity helps, again, in that bond when one sees oneself represented in the legal system, on the bench, amongst the other judicial actors, legal actors. One sees, I think, and a shared experience is possible, and therefore it creates a bond between the person on this side of the bench and the person on the other side of the bench. And I think that's critical to the legitimacy of the system.
Merci beaucoup pour cette réponse.
Thank you very much for that answer. Secondly, we've heard a lot on the fact that the majority of sexual assault cases are
outside of where this legislation will be touching, basically within the provincial courts. So can you speak to how you have spoken with your counterparts in the provincial side a bit more, how they can enact legislation similar to C5?
Thank you. Alors, ici, j'ai écrit une lettre,
Well, I've written a letter and I've started a dialogue with my counterparts throughout Canada, but it's setting an example. You set the tone, and I sincerely believe in doing so. We will encourage and incite them to see if they can, not do something identical, but do in like manner.
Mr. McGuire, you're up for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Minister for being here. I mentioned this to the Justices this morning in regards to Ms. Ambrose's former Bill 377, and when it was studied in the committee before, the Federal Ombudsman for Victims of Crime put forward a lot of recommendations, and with only one of 20 victims of sexual assault coming forward, that's part of this bill, is just to look at the credibility of why we don't have more people coming forward and the confidence in the system. And even went so far as to say that it would be a huge gap missing if the recommendations of the Ombudsman, some of them at least, weren't put in the new bill. Can you just outline if any of those were accepted?
Well, we certainly will work. We took the previous Bill C-337 as amended in the Senate as our base to move forward, because we had unanimous consent for that bill in the last Parliament, and so we thought this was a good starting point. That being said, we'll look at what the Ombudsman has to suggest, and obviously the point of view of victims in here is critically important. Again, as you said, to the confidence of the system. I think that's absolutely right, and making sure that a system doesn't re-victimize victims, making sure that there is a sensitive dialogue between actors within the system when sexual assault cases are being dealt with is critically important to moving forward. So I will listen carefully to what she has to say.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. I understand that none of those, I couldn't find them in the anyway, so I wonder if that might be something to look at. I just wonder too, when you brought Bill C5 forward and in drafting it, did you meet with any of the survivor groups that are out there today and include any of their recommendations?
I have met with survivor groups since I was appointed just over a year ago in a number of jurisdictions across Canada. I've heard what they've had to say, and they will inform not only this piece of legislation, but hopefully other pieces of legislation as we move forward.
Can you just outline some of the things that you may have heard from them that are included?
Well, there is, and Mr. McGregor alluded to this. There is, in particular, in the process, a lack of support for people as they move through the process. Excuse me. And I think that's the single most important comment that I heard time and time again. It is mainly provincial jurisdiction because the administration of justice is provincial. But we're working with our provincial counterparts. There are a number of very interesting proposals. I think of my home jurisdiction, Quebec, which has, I think, organisms called CAVAX, which help and accompany victims of sexual assault through these various processes. We obviously need to be working with the provinces to have more of those kinds of supports for victims of sexual assault.
Thank you, Minister Lametti. We are moving on to Mr. Sangha. I believe you're sharing some time with Mr. Callaway.
Yeah, thank you, Minister, for this coming today to our committee. See, it's very clear that we as legislators want to preserve the constitutional principle of judicial independence. And at the same time, we have heard here today Justice Kent and Justice McDonald, and they were very concerned about by maintaining the judicial independence. But at this time, we find that the judicial committee has to give a report to the minister, submit a report regarding the training. So don't you think that this is one step we are going towards diminishing the independence of the judiciary? And if not, then what is the purpose of this reporting?
Thank you. Thank you. I share the concern around the table that it is fundamental that we maintain judicial independence in our system, and I respect that principle. It's part of my DNA. We're trying to achieve a delicate balance here, and we are trying to make sure that judges who hear sexual assault cases have the appropriate degree of training, and also that they're accountable. And that's really where your question touches on the accountability. The gathering of statistics, as has been pointed out, in an in-nominate fashion, so people's names won't be attached, and neither won't be able to identify judges, still helps in seeing how successful we are in making sure that the bench is well trained generally, and it allows us to say, okay, we're doing well. We don't need to go further. It may allow us to down the road to say maybe we're not doing enough. Is there another way that we could ensure that judges are better trained or the bench could be better prepared? So it just helps us as an accounting matter.
Okay, over to me. Thanks, Minister, and thanks to the previous witnesses. As a person who works back home, and I say back home in Cape Breton, Canso, with a lot of frontline organizations, I'm curious what you can tell me about the experiences of frontline organizations and how they might be able to inform training that you're looking to implement here, or not you, but the organizations in question. I'm interested in your take on that.
Well, we're hoping that those first of all, those frontline organizations have a great deal to say, and as I've said, I've gone across the country and spoken to a number of them, and it is both moving and also inspiring to see what people are doing in the field. Hopefully, again through the consultation process, and we'll be able to nudge people towards the CJC. Hopefully, the CJC will take on some of the. We'll certainly meet with and consult with people who are frontline workers, and hopefully that will have a positive impact in the process as we move forward.
I think you're
you're good for time. Sorry.
Thanks for playing.
Monsieur Fortin, you have 1 minute, please.
Monsieur Lametti,
Minister Lametti, I won't repeat what's already been said on the issue of judicial independence. The second concern of the previous witnesses were on jurisdictional issues, and you've dealt with that. The necessity, perhaps, for provincial and territorial judges to obtain some training. For practitioners in Quebec, yourself among them, do you feel that Quebec-appointed judges respond to many of the criteria and objectives of Bill C-5? It would be most inopportune of me to answer that, to give an opinion on that. I'm not going to wander into the jurisdiction of my provincial counterpart. When I talk of the criminal code amendments, I realize that this would address to federally appointed or provincially appointed judges, of course, criminal code being in that. Oui, parce que it's not mandatory by tradition and usage, but it's a very, very desirable result, and this is what we hope to get.
But, Mr. McGregor, do you have any questions at all before we move into committee business?
How much time?
You have literally not even 1 minute.
Well, just a comment from you, Minister Lametti. The TRC's call to action number 27 called for the Federation of Law Societies to implement this training. Is that something that might be applicable in the future to judges as well?
Again, all suggestions are good suggestions, but we have to respect the principle of judicial independence. There has to be a way to have greater representation of Indigenous peoples in our justice system and on the bench in particular. We'll do our best to respect all of these principles and try to find the appropriate balances.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister and officials, for coming in here today. We really appreciate your being here and for your and taking questions from the committee on this very important legislation. I am going to suspend the meeting while we clear the room of non-members and non-staff as well. And then please hurry back. We have some committee business to discuss.